everyone. My name is Keith Welch and I'm from Marshall, Illinois, and welcome to my hangar here at the Terre Haute Regional Airport in Terre Haute, Indiana. The airplane that you see behind me is a Quickie that I built. I purchased the kit in 1980 and the airplane first flew on 21 May of '89. The airplane has since accumulated about 400 hours and has made several trips over the years. Most flights have been local, but it has been Quickie Builder Association fly-ins in Ottawa, Kansas, Sullivan, Missouri, in Davenport, Iowa, some local flights, and was topped off in Oshkosh 2019 with a trip to Oshkosh to participate in the Rutan tribute flight. And the airplane was awarded, I can't believe that it was a 30-year-old airplane, but it was awarded the Outstanding Workmanship in the Planes Built category, which I'm quite proud of that and was really quite surprised that it was even included with that group of airplanes. Before I get into actually talking about the Quickie, and what I thought I would do is describe some of the things that I experienced during the building process that maybe have helped to some of those who are still working on kits, or they've acquired orphan kits and trying to get them finished, and maybe some tips that they can gather along the way might be helpful. A little about myself, and who am I, and what am I doing here. I was raised on a family grain and livestock operation, and I was one of those kids that like to look up. And the prospects of learning to fly probably seemed more like a pipe dream than anything. But in 1978, the opportunity presented itself, and I was able to acquire my pilot's license. And about a year later, the reality began to set in. This is going to be pretty short-lived. So, it's going to be one of those thanks for the memories things. Until one day I met a member of our local EAA chapter, and that provided the inspiration to what has gotten me to where I am today. So, like I said before, my first Oshkosh was in 1980, and I remember visiting with Gene Sheehan at the Quickie booth, which was quite busy back at that time. And both Gene and Tom were very, very nice people. I really enjoyed visiting with them. And Gene kind of struck me as someone who's a little bit of like a duck out of water, but that wasn't his most preferred environment. But they were kept quite busy and did quite well. A little of the origins of the Quickie that some of you may not know, or those who are working on some of these kits. I mean, the prototype flew 43 years ago. So, the company has been out of business for many years, and there's a lot of these kits just sitting out there. Now, I don't know what publications or information is available with them anymore, but the Quickie actually dates back to January early 1975, when the search started for an engine that Gene and Tom thought would be suitable for powering a small, light aircraft. And they were looking primarily in the 12 to 25 horsepower range. It wasn't until January of 1977 that they actually came up with an engine that they felt was usable. And that was the industrial four-stroke engine manufactured by the Onan Corporation. It was a little two-cylinder opposed aluminum block engine. And construction of the prototype began in August of 1977 with the help of Burt Rutan, who designed the aircraft around the engine. So then began the existence of the Rutan Model 54. And once the aircraft was completed and test flights began, then the name Quickie was given to the actual airplane. So that's just a little history of how the Quickie got to where it got. And like I say, it's a pretty interesting little history for a little airplane, and to do what it can do on the horsepower that it does is really quite amazing. So let's get started, and I'll give you a tour around the airplane. First thing I'd like to talk to you about is in 1995, Burt Rutan was in Terre Haute, Indiana, and I was asked to present the Quickie during his visit. So when he walked up to the Quickie and looked at it, the first thing he did was walk around and start sighting all my trailing edges. And it wasn't until he was actually on the other side of the airplane that I had any idea what he was actually doing. And when he got done sighting the trailing edges, he asked me how I got them so straight. Well, I told him that at Oshkosh, one thing I noticed was all the composite airplanes trailing edges secured wavy. So when I built this airplane, one thing that I did, and I think this is what I did, it's been a long time ago, but I think I put a 2x4 down wax paper on top of it to force those trailing edges to cure straight. And the other thing he asked me about, that we talked actually quite at length about, was the Canard. When he approached the Canard, he saw that I did not have the Vortex generators on at that time, and he wondered why I didn't. Well, at that time, Quickie Aircraft Corporation maintained that the good finished Canards didn't need those. Well, there's about a month and a half's worth of sanding on that Canard, and you can almost pick your teeth in the image on it, so I didn't worry too much about it. Well, Bert told me that what I needed to do to prove his point that they were needed was place duct tape along half the leading edge of the Canard and then go fly it. Well, here at Terre Haute, we have a 9,000 foot runway, so he thought that ought to work pretty good. And I'd probably get the airplane in the air, but then I'd want to put it right back down. So, unfortunately, it was later that summer, because that was in March when he was here. Later that summer, I was actually at a local airport restaurant, and it was overcast. Rain was forecast for later in the day, but it began to cloud up pretty good, so I thought it was time to go home. And when I did, I was, 2/3 of the way home, I would suppose, and I saw little drips of rain on my canopy, and immediately the control stick got heavy, and it was pretty obvious the airplane was not going to stay up. So fortunately, it was just a light drizzle. That's all the more it rained, and I actually flew out of it. So then I was able to make a beeline back to Terre Haute and get the little fellow on the ground. Now you notice the Vortex generators on this airplane, they're spaced about every other pair is missing. Well, the original layout called for 72 of those per side, laid out like the Very Easy wings, and those were the kits that were supplied, used a template from the Very Easies. Well, the Vortex generators had to be straight with the airflow, and our wings are swept, and the Very Easy is not. So that was an adjustment that had to be made. Plus the template that I used actually skipped every other pair, and the template, if I can keep from falling down, is right here. And all the things I did to trial and error, or you think about doing experiments with these airplanes, and the last thing you want to do is stick your neck out too far. So I thought that messing with the Vortex generators, trying alternate spacings, was something that would be a very low risk thing to try. So I just went ahead and tried it. And I remember very well the very first flight after this was done. Oh, and you can see this has actually had to be repaired too. The very first flight, normally this Canard would take off very lazily. Well, when it generated lift, it was in the air right now. It was all of a sudden, it was something I was completely not used to. It is quite obvious the generators had made quite a difference in the response to the wing. So that was really pretty cool. But was it going to fly in the rain? Well, it was, I think probably either later that summer or the next year, something in there. Terry Crouch was down here in his airplane, and we flew back to, on the way back to Ottawa, I flew about halfway back with him, and I was going to turn around and come back. Well, about Champaign, Illinois, we ran into popcorn thunderstorms that were operating. Well, popcorn thunderstorm, little storm here, daylight there. So we thought we'd just start skirting those storms, and if it didn't work, I could always go out to clear air and head back home. They worked. Got into the rain, actually a fairly decent rain at the edge of the thunderstorm, and there was no trim change needed. The airplane handled beautifully, and I was just as pleased as punch with it. So the big lesson I learned that day was Quickie Aircraft was wrong and Burt Rutan was right. So that was a huge change, and it's been fine with the generators ever since. Now these particular Vortex generators came from a company called Computer Certainty, and they're no longer in business, but generators very similar to these can be found in Aircraft Spruce catalog. The other thing that I experienced when building the Canard was the wheel pants. According to the plans, you line up, put one wheel pan on, you sight across to the other one and line it up. Well, those are 1/4-inch pilot holes. That's a long way to look to sight something that far on the other side. And there was no possibility. I just wasn't nearly about to do that because they were wanting a zero camber and zero caster. Well, the bad time to find out you have alignment problems when you touch down at 55 miles per hour. So what I ended up doing was taking a piece of thread, a couple of toothpicks, and a stout rubber band and stretching between all 4 of those holes. And I'm here to tell you that was like a rifle shot. That worked out great. Got the wheel pants lined up, and the airplane handles really quite well. One of the other things that some of you experienced Quickie guys will notice that I do not have the fuselage cut on this one. No particular reason, I just didn't do it. I figured if the airplane ever went down, I'd probably cut it up and haul it home anyway. So really never did worry too much about it. And what not having that has kept me from being able to do is to update the tail spring cable assortment. Nowadays, you separate the rudder from the tail wheel. As you can see, mine are still together as it always was, and largely because it'd be quite difficult to make that adjustment. Well, on the good side, there's only about 7 pounds on the tail wheel as the airplane sets. So I don't think I've ever smacked it hard enough to be a problem for that tail spring. So that has actually worked out pretty good. I get asked about the stripes from time to time. No, they're not painted. Those are vinyl stripes, and a custom car guy locally came out and put those on and worked out really quite well. So now let's take a look at the interior of the airplane. As you can see, my interior is fully finished. While it might look pretty, I ended up with a backache from about, probably 2-3 weeks of doing that, and my back hurt for 2 months after that. So if you're young and full of vim and vigor, yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out. So anyway, I'm going to step back over here and get a flashlight. Just one moment. We'll take a look at some more things. Doesn't pay to forget the flashlight. Now, a few things I want to point out on the interior. One is the fuel sight gauge. This fuel sight gauge is not the standard that comes with the kit. The standard gauge is a Tygo thing. Well, I had replaced those numerous times over the years as they would get cloudy. Not everybody has this problem, but this airplane did. And I used, unleaded, I use non-ethanol regular car gas, just I think about like everybody else does. But anyway, just before Oshkosh last year, this thing had to be replaced. So I called McMaster Car and just asked them about the Tygo thing, and the guy on the other end of the phone said, "Who told you to use that?" He goes, "I could have told you don't be using that." He said, "That thing will fog right up." Well, yeah, no kidding. He said, "I needed to use Pyrex." So the Pyrex is, it's cookingware glass, so it's very, very durable. So that's what I used here, and I found out that with a little Dremel tool, really the Pyrex is quite easy to cut. The other thing I might mention in the cockpit area, and keep my fingers away from the camera, is that U-joint right there. The elevator torque tubes actually, as you can see, come across, and according to the plans, they mount up into that phenolic block on the right, And in my case, the torque tube was low. It didn't line up with that phenolic block, and to make it do that, I'd had to, adjust or, change the shape of the phenolic block a little bit, and in turn, that would have made so the turnbuckle that keeps the neutralizes both elevators, I wouldn't have had the adjustments. So I put a turnbuckle in there, and I've since found out that that is not that unusual to have to do. Now, one of the questions I get once in a while is the rotor pedals. This, according to the brochures, a 6 foot 6 inch, 210 pallet could fly in one of these airplanes. Well, I'm not that tall, so the rudder pedals are too far forward for me. And rather than move them, I just took and glassed on. I think that's foam or phenolic block. I can't remember what that is there, and that made up the distance for me. So that's one way of working with that. I've also been asked about that round thing right up there. That folks, that really is a 10-inch pipe pan. It had the decal on of a lady cooking when it came with the kit. So that was actually supplied with the kit. Moving on back here a little bit. Here is my throttle. There's all different ways of doing the throttle. I used a throttle quadrant that I purchased from Aircraft Spruce and was able to incorporate the push to talk switch in it, so that worked real good. Right ahead of that, you see there's my trim system. This airplane is just VFR, and the center instrument right there, that was one of those fancy dancy tachometers that tell you all kinds of stuff you really didn't care about. It didn't last very long, but it provided a good mounting for a tiny tack to be glued behind it. Well, one other thing it also did, it had a location for a micro toggle switch, which that operates my CHT. So I have CHT on both cylinders, and that's how I differentiate between them. So that worked out really good. So basically, the airplane's just basic VFR. Has the Quickie brake system, pull and hope for the best. One thing Quickie Aircraft was nice about doing, they said they sent you about 10% extra hardware. Well, they also sent me a little bit of extra belt brake. So that I'm able to use for the parking brake, which it will hold the airplane when starting the airplane at idle. So other than that, she's pretty much straightforward. You notice my instrument panel does not come up with a canopy. There's a good reason for that. I have a radio that extends about up in here somewhere. So that's why I made the instrument panel kind of stay with the cockpit, and that necessitated making its own little bulkhead, just a piece of aluminum and some foam, probably overbuilt, but at least it does the job. And the panel's mounted on rubber, so it can handle some vibration. Other than that, there's my my headset switches are back there, or the headset plug-in is right back there. And inside the, get in here a little bit, get the seat pulled forward, and you can see what I did with that flashlight. And you can see what's inside my storage area. There's a storage compartment. You can carry clothes in there for a weekend without too much trouble. It's amazing how tight t-shirts and shorts will fold up. And of course, you see the battery. And on the lower right, that's the strobe control. You really wouldn't even use those anymore, but back in the day, that's what the power source for the strobes that I have. So that'll take care of pretty much the interior of the airplane. Let's move to the area that gets the most attention from folks that work that's around these airplanes, and that is the engine. And a couple things I want to point out before we pull the cowling off. Through the years, there has been holes here, and big slots here to get air to hopefully cool the cylinder heads to address the temperatures. And also, you'll see that grill work right there and the cowl flap underneath of it. Those all came about later. The problem with this engine arrangement, I purchased a 22 horse option, which was a disaster. That thing was, 10 hours the oil was black, 20 hours the rings were out of it. And of course the valves were burned out as well. So it was a nightmare. You learn the hard way that the airplane is only a pattern capable airplane. When you're trying to fly cross countries and go places with it, because you're so proud of your new airplane. I've had the throttle linkage brake on it in flight. Fortunately, the push tube, the push rod was actually able to connect with the carburetor throttle and at least give me enough throttle to get back to the airport. They would redline the oil temperatures at 400. It ran at 400. The oil temps redline about 240. It ran at 240. And the engine just would not live. So a lot of work had to be done. The first thing, and let me set this camera down, we'll get that cowling off for you, and then we'll kind of go through some of the things that was done to correct some of the problems I had with the engine. Alrighty, here we go. Those of you familiar with the Quickie engine installation will notice this does not look anything like what the plans said to do. The plan's baffle arrangement was the normal aircraft down the side and across the back. The temperatures that I was running could not be sustained. Something had to be done. The first thing that made a big change, which actually helped the CHTs a little, but not much, you could still overheat it, were the cylinder heads. And in the meantime, about the mid-80s, the Onan had upgraded their 47 cubic inch engine to to what they call the Performer series. Well, what you see here is actually the result of 5 overhauls and 2 engines. The short block that I bought for this is actually the Performer series short block. Well, in the mid-80s, one of the things that was changed on these engines were the heads. So the 20 horsepower heads, the spark plug does not have a gasket under it. It's a beveled seat spark plug, and sits lower in the head. It's kind of like a little dome-shaped head, and it just works absolutely fantastic. So that was the first big change in the airplane, or in the engine. And the second was when I realized that on the OEM, the flywheel back here, get the flight in the right place, the flywheel situated way back there that contained the magnets for the stator. Well, that was where the big flywheel originally went. So air was being pushed from the back to the front. Well, we're running the air just opposite direction. So instead of the exhaust side of the engine getting the air first, we're getting it there last. So what really started changing my cooling problems was I had a John Deere that had the same engine in it, and the more I began to mimic off of it, the more cooling problems I began to solve. And one thing I did notice on the OEM, air did not go anywhere except where it was supposed to go. There was not a big sink for the air to migrate its way through. It was purposely directed. So that was kind of what I tried to do with this, was mimic the OEM but backwards. So the key here was to create a tight baffled cowling to where it would pressurize and run as much air as possible through these hoods here to get air to the back of the engine as much volume as quickly as possible to the back of the engine. That made a big difference, but the biggest difference in oil temperatures, that helped. That, you know, it was on the right tracks. It's starting to get oil temps down, but the big difference on the oil temperatures, to get them down, remember that grill work that we showed you underneath? Okay, well there's the oil pan is all baffled off. And that baffling was put on that oil pan, and the heat sink welded underneath of it. And once that grill work was put in front, that's over there on the cowling, you see that? Oil temperatures came down 50 degrees right now. So now, even on the hottest days, if it gets to 200, it has gotten pretty hot. Generally, I'll never see it above 190 at the hottest. So that made a tremendous improvement in the oil temperatures. The other thing on the cylinder head temperatures that made a big difference, and you can see that little silver thing right there. See that little silver? There's a gap between the fins and the lower valve stem box to let air flow through there. Well, Terry Crouch noticed that he was getting bugs on his engine mount. Well, the only way for that to happen is for the air to go screaming through there. So once he closed those up, he began to see an improvement in his cylinder head temperatures. Once I did that on this engine, my CHTs, really, if they get to 350 on a hot day, that's warm now, and it'll cruise in the 275, 280 range. So that was just tremendous improvement. The other thing I might point out is, you notice the light's awfully bright, isn't it? You notice the area where the head bolts go through. On the original Onan engine that came with the kit, those head bolt threaded areas only went 2 fins deep. On the Performer, they go 3 fins. Well, I bought a brand new set of head bolts from Onan, paid good money for them. They were the same as I bought them for the Performer engine. They were same head bolts. So anyway, I had actually went out and got some grade 8 bolts and put in there. And since then, it's actually been studded. So that took care of that. So other things on the engine, you might notice the carburetor is different looking than yours. When I put this short block on there, I put all the Quickie stuff, intake manifold and carburetor on it. Well, the engine ran terrible. I mean, it was terrible. So the only thing to do was rob the parts off my John Deere and see what they did. Well, needless to say, the thing roared like a cannon. It was unbelievable the difference that made in the way that engine ran. So obviously I was spending more money for more parts. And I read an article one time from the, I think it's the 1988 issue, the AOP8 Pilot magazine, had a nice big article on icing. Well, the last 2 paragraphs of that article is what really got my attention when it talked about Teflon coating aircraft induction systems, as to not only reducing the chance for icing, but eliminating icing. So I found what I did, one hot humid day out in front of the hangar, I just took the cowling off of it and I looked down in the carburetor as the engine was running, and I was amazed at how much water was condensing out of the air and just building on that throttle plate and would slough off. So I got online, I found a company in Indianapolis that actually did commercial Teflon coating. They even did for several of the Indy racing teams in Indianapolis at that time, and may still for that matter. But anyway, I called them, explained to them what I had, and they agreed to Teflon coat my throttle shaft, my throttle plate, and the intake manifold. Nice thing about the Onan intake manifold is they're riveted together, so you can take them apart to 2 pieces and easy for folks like them to work with. So those were sent, put on the engine, and I remember the first time I ran the engine and looked down in the carburetor, it was amazing how small the water droplets were compared to before, and how fast they would run off that airframe or run off that throttle plate. It was just really amazing. So, so at least I know that that is something that actually works. One other thing I might mention is some of you Quickie builders out there that have been flying these Onins probably have had an exhaust pipe come off. If you haven't, you're lucky, because they usually do. I lost one time. Landed, noticed it was idling kind of funny, pulled the cowling off, and sure enough, only had one exhaust pipe. So there's one sitting in somebody's cornfield. But anyway, what we had to do is came back and actually brace those exhaust pipes. My original braces actually came over to the cylinder head. Well, this is another Terry Crouch idea that has found its way to this airplane. If you can see that silver, that clear tube, or that shiny tube way down there, that is a brace that Terry Crouch has come up with that ties to the exhaust pipe and then mounts to, back over here, mounts to the engine mount, the phenolic. So that works real good. And one thing I might mention is, one thing we tried to do is you don't want these bolts to be tight, because this stuff is going to move. There needs to be a little bit of skosh movement. So we just use lock washers and just drew them down until there was a little bit of play. And it's been like that for several years now, I guess. So anyway, that pretty much covers, I think, most of the things I wanted to talk about on the airplane. I know Sam wants to know the most memorable flights, and mine would have had to been in last year, my trip to Oshkosh. I don't know how. I know there's a lot of Quickie guys that have had their airplanes at Oshkosh, and for me, it was kind of like graduation day. You just it's an experience that you've gotta have, flying your home built to the big air show. It was really a memory that I'll never forget, the experience. And you have to fly an airplane for all these years. That's no doubt has been the highlight for me. So anyway, if anybody has any questions about anything that they have seen here, or questions they have about the Quickie, try to get to where I get the camera set up there. But first, I enjoyed sharing the airplane with you, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you maybe learned something from it that you can apply. If any of you have any questions, be sure and ask on the queue list, and we'll do what we can to help your building experience result in a flying airplane. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and have a good day, everybody.